The gentle snowflakes danced outside the massive windows of the penthouse office, creating a peaceful scene that contrasted sharply with the turmoil in Alex Chen's heart. Standing there in his tailored suit, he pressed his forehead against the cool glass, watching the first December snow blanket New York City in white. At 42, he had everything money could buy: the corner office, the luxury penthouses around the world, and a business empire that made headlines. But none of it filled the emptiness left behind by Claire. 3 years had passed since that terrible morning when his world shattered. The doctors had tried everything, but sometimes even the best medical care and endless resources couldn't change fate. The memory of their last conversation still haunted him. They had been planning to start fertility treatments, dreaming of the family they would build together. Now those dreams lay buried with her, along with his ability to imagine a future filled with love and laughter. His phone buzzed again, probably another message from his sister Lisa. She meant well with her constant attempts to set him up with perfect matches from their social circle, but she didn't understand. These women, with their practiced smiles and calculated interests, only saw his bank account and business empire. They didn't see the man who still kept Claire's favorite coffee mug in his kitchen cabinet, unable to move it to storage with her other things. Running his company kept him busy during the day. Board meetings, investment decisions, and global expansion plans filled his calendar from dawn to dusk. His employees saw him as the focused, decisive leader who had doubled the company's worth in the past 3 years. None of them knew that work had become his escape, a way to exhaust himself so thoroughly that he wouldn't lie awake at night, staring at the empty side of his bed. The snow was falling heavier now, making the city lights blur into soft glows. Far below, people hurried along the streets, wrapped up in coats and scarves, heading home to their families. A young father caught his little girl as she slipped on the snowy sidewalk, both of them laughing as they regained their balance. Alex turned away from the window, the scene too painful to watch. His office felt suffocating despite its size. Awards and accolades lined the walls: Businessman of the Year, 40 under 40, Innovation Leader, each one as meaningless as the last. What good was success if you had no one to share it with? Claire would have known how to make this space feel like more than just a glossy magazine cover. She had that gift, turning every place she touched into something warm and real. The intercom buzzed, his assistant's voice breaking through his thoughts. "Sir, the charity board is waiting in the conference room. They're here about the children's hospital wing donation." "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," he replied, straightening his tie. Claire had always been passionate about children's causes. The hospital wing would bear her name, a tribute to the family they never got to have, and the lives she always wanted to help. Maybe that's why he threw himself into these projects now, trying to keep some part of her dreams alive. As he gathered his papers, a small frame on his desk caught his eye. It held a simple post-it note in Claire's handwriting: "Remember to live, not just exist." She had stuck it to his laptop one morning, worried he was losing himself in work. Now it was preserved behind glass, a reminder of a time when someone cared enough to notice the difference between living and existing. The snow continued to fall outside as Alex headed to the conference room, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Another year was ending, and soon his sister would try to drag him to some New Year's Eve party, insisting he needed to get back out there. But how do you explain to someone that your heart feels frozen in time, trapped in that hospital room 3 years ago, unable to move forward? For now, he would do what he did best: pour himself into his work, build his empire higher, donate to more causes, and try to ignore the whispers at charity galas about the lonely billionaire. Let them whisper. They didn't understand that some wounds don't heal just because time passes, and some spaces can't be filled with money or success. As he pushed open the conference room door, Alex put on the mask he perfected over the years: confident, composed, in control. But inside, a quiet voice wondered if this was all there would ever be: endless meetings, empty achievements, and nights spent watching snow fall on a city full of families and dreams that no longer felt possible for him. New Year's Eve arrived with another flurry of snow and an inbox full of party invitations that Alex couldn't bring himself to open. The thought of another evening surrounded by fake smiles and pitying glances made his stomach turn. His sister had left 3 voicemails about the charity gala at the plaza, each more insistent than the last, but he'd already made up his mind. This year would end differently. He found himself driving through Brooklyn, far from the glittering parties of Manhattan. The old Chevy he kept hidden in his garage, the one he and Claire had driven cross-country in before they made it big, hummed softly as snow gathered on the windshield. He hadn't planned to end up at Joe's Diner with its neon sign flickering against the darkening sky, but something about its warm glow pulled him in. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, shaking snow from his coat. The diner was nearly empty, just a few late shift workers nursing cups of coffee. Christmas lights still twinkled along the windows, reflecting in the chrome and red vinyl booths. It reminded him of the place where he and Claire used to grab midnight pancakes during their college days. Coffee? A voice broke through his memories. He looked up to find a woman in light blue scrubs holding a coffee pot, her name tag reading Emmy. There were dark circles under her eyes, but her smile was genuine, the kind that reached all the way up and made the corners of her eyes crinkle. "Please," he nodded, settling into a booth by the window. "Working the holiday shift." "Just finished at the Children's Hospital across the street," she replied, filling his cup. "Picking up extra hours so others can be with their families tonight." She had a way of speaking that put people at ease, nothing like the practiced small talk he was used to. Before he could respond, the diner's door burst open. A frantic woman rushed in, her voice trembling. "Is there a nurse here? Please, my son, he's having an allergic reaction." Annie was already moving, coffee pot forgotten on Alex's table. He watched as she ran outside, her professional calm taking over. Without thinking, he followed. In the parking lot, a young boy sat in a car, his breathing labored, face swollen. Emmy assessed the situation quickly, her voice steady as she asked the mother questions. "He has an EpiPen, but I can't find it in my purse," the mother was saying, hands shaking as she dumped her bag's contents onto the snow-covered ground. Alex knelt down, helping to search through the scattered items. His flashlight app illuminated lipsticks, receipts, and finally, the EpiPen. Emmy administered it with practiced ease, then stayed with the boy until his breathing normalized. Only after the ambulance arrived and the crisis passed did she seem to notice the snow soaking through her scrubs. Back inside the diner, Alex found himself sitting across from Emmy, 2 fresh cups of coffee steaming between them. She changed into dry scrubs from her bag, her hair now pulled back in a messy bun. "Sorry about abandoning your coffee earlier," she smiled, adding cream to hers. "I think saving a life takes priority," he replied, surprised to find himself smiling back. "You're good at what you do." "Pediatric nursing isn't just a job," she shrugged, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "These kids, they're fighting battles bigger than themselves every day. The least I can do is fight alongside them." As midnight approached, they talked, really talked, not the superficial conversations he was used to at business functions. Andy told him about her patients, the little victories and heartbreaking setbacks. She spoke about hope in a way that didn't sound naive or forced, but hard-won and real. "What brings a man in an Italian wool coat to Joe's Diner on New Year's Eve?" she finally asked, her head tilted curiously. "Would you believe me if I said the pancakes?" He deflected, but something in her steady gaze made him continue. "Actually, I'm avoiding a charity gala. Too many people who think they know exactly what I need to move on with my life." Understanding flickered across her face. "Ah, the well-meaning fixers. I know the type. After my brother passed, everyone had an opinion about my grief timeline." The diner's ancient TV counted down to midnight, Dick Clark's voice competing with the sound of distant fireworks. Other customers had drifted in, seeking warmth and coffee, creating a cozy atmosphere that felt more genuine than any high society party. To new beginnings. Annie raised her coffee cup as the clock struck 12. "To unexpected meetings," Alex replied, tapping his cup against hers. For the first time in 3 years, the start of a new year didn't feel like another milestone of loneliness. Instead, sitting in a Brooklyn diner with melting snow outside and the smell of coffee in the air, it felt like the world had cracked open just a little, letting in a glimmer of something that felt surprisingly like hope. The first sunrise of the new year painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as Alex stood in front of Claire's grave. Fresh snow covered the ground, untouched except for his footprints leading to this spot. He'd come here every New Year's morning since she passed, but today felt different. The weight in his chest wasn't quite as crushing. You'd like her, he said softly, brushing snow from the top of the headstone. Emmy, I mean, she has your way of seeing through people's walls. He paused, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. She lost someone too, her brother. She understands that grief isn't something you just get over. A cardinal landed on a nearby branch, its red feathers bright against the white landscape. Claire had loved watching them in their backyard, insisting they brought messages from loved ones. Alex smiled at the memory, no longer feeling the sharp pain that usually accompanied thoughts of her. I think it's time, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Not to forget, never that, but to keep my promise to you. Remember what you made me swear in the hospital? That I wouldn't lock my heart away forever. That I'd find a way to build the family we dreamed of, even if you couldn't be part of it. The sun climbed higher, making the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds. Alex pulled his coat tighter against the January chill, remembering the night before at Joe's dinner. How easy it had been to talk with Amy, how her eyes lit up when she spoke about her young patients, how she understood the language of loss without needing it explained. His phone buzzed, a text from Amy. Hope you're not regretting those 3 a.m. pancakes. The kids at the hospital loved the New Year's gifts you sent this morning. He smiled, remembering how their conversation had turned to their patients and how he'd impulsively arranged for toys to be delivered to the children's ward. Looking back at Claire's headstone, he felt a shift inside himself, like ice beginning to thaw. I think you sent her my way, he said softly, not as a replacement, there could never be one, but as a reminder that my heart still works, even if it's been on pause for these past 3 years. The cardinal took flight, disappearing into the pale morning sky. Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out the small photo he always carried, him and Claire on their wedding day, both laughing at something now forgotten. He traced her smile with his finger, remembering how she always said that love wasn't about holding on so tight you couldn't breathe, but about having faith in new beginnings. I made a different kind of promise last night, he told her. Not just to myself, but to all those kids at the hospital. Emmy told me about their struggles, their courage, their dreams. I promised to use what we built together to make a difference in their lives. The new children's wing will be more than just a building with your name on it. It'll be a place of hope. The morning grew warmer, melting tiny droplets from tree branches above. Each one caught the light as it fell, like tears of joy rather than sorrow. Alex thought about how Emmy had described her work, not just treating illnesses, but nurturing spirits, keeping hope alive in the darkest moments. You always said our success would mean nothing if we didn't use it to help others, he continued. I lost sight of that after you left. Got caught up in building bigger, earning more, as if that could fill the empty spaces. But watching Annie with that boy in the parking lot, seeing how one person's care can change everything, it reminded me of what really matters. He pulled out the small notebook he carried everywhere, opening to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote, Promises for a new year. Below it, he began to list. 1. Open heart to possibilities. 2. Honor Claire's memory through actions, not just memorials. 3. Use resources to make real changes in children's lives. 4. Trust in new beginnings. A family walked past nearby, their young daughter throwing snowballs at her father. Their laughter floated through the quiet morning air, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't make Alex want to turn away. Instead, he found himself smiling, remembering Claire's infectious laugh and how she always said that joy was meant to be shared. I'll always love you, he said, standing up and brushing snow from his knees. That's a promise that will never change. But I think I'm ready to keep that other promise now, the one about living fully again, about building something meaningful from all this loss. As he walked back through the cemetery, his footprints now accompanied by the cardinal's tiny tracks in the snow, Alex felt something he hadn't experienced in years, possibility. Not the hollow kind that came with business deals or financial gains, but the warm, human kind that came with opening your heart to new connections, new purpose, new ways of honoring old loves while making room for new ones. His phone buzzed again, another message from Annie. Kids are asking when their new friend is coming back to read stories. No pressure, but you've got some fans in the cancer ward. Alex smiled, already knowing he'd be there. Some promises he was learning didn't feel like obligations at all. They felt like stepping stones across a river he'd thought was uncrossable, leading him back to the land of the living. The children's ward buzzed with a different kind of energy than Alex was used to. Instead of the calculated enthusiasm of board meetings, here was pure, unfiltered joy as he walked through the door, carrying a stack of books. 3 weeks had passed since New Year's Eve, and these visits had become the highlight of his week. "Mr. A," small voices called out as he entered the playroom. Among them, a small boy with bright eyes and a red beanie sat in his wheelchair by the window. This was Danny, the 8-year-old who had stolen everyone's hearts with his incredible spirit despite fighting a tough battle with his illness. Amy stood nearby, adjusting Danny's IV line with gentle hands. She caught Alex's eye and smiled, that same genuine smile that had first caught his attention at the diner. "Look who's right on time for story hour," she said to Danny, who was already wheeling himself closer to his favorite reading spot. "Did you bring the space book?" Danny asked, his eyes lighting up as Alex settled into the chair beside him. "The one about the astronaut who fixed the telescope?" "Even better," Alex replied, pulling out a book about the Mars rovers. "This one has real pictures from another planet." He watched as Danny's face filled with wonder, temporarily forgetting about the tubes and monitors that surrounded him. Other children gathered around, some in wheelchairs, others dragging IV poles, but all wearing expressions of curiosity and excitement. Alex had learned each of their names, their stories, their dreams. Little Rose wanted to be a doctor, inspired by the nurses who cared for her. Twins Peter and Paul competed to see who could memorize more facts about dinosaurs during their treatments. As Alex read, doing different voices for each character, something he'd never imagined himself doing a month ago, he noticed Emmy watching from the nurse's station. She was updating charts, but her eyes kept drifting to their little group, a soft expression on her face that made his heart do unexpected things. "Mr. A," Danny whispered during a pause in the story, "can I tell you a secret?" Alex leaned closer, aware of the trust this small boy placed in him. "When I grow up, I want to build robots that help sick kids feel better. Like the Mars rover, but for hospitals." The simple dream, spoken with such conviction, hit Alex hard. He was a child facing battles no kid should have to face, yet still looking toward the future with hope and purpose. It reminded him of Claire's unwavering optimism, her belief that every challenge had a purpose. After story time, as the other children returned to their rooms for afternoon treatments, Danny stayed behind. "Can you come to my science fair next week?" he asked, fiddling with the edge of his blanket. "I mean, if you're not too busy with your big company stuff." Alex knelt down to meet Danny's eyes. "There's nothing more important than your science fair. What's your project about?" "It's a surprise." Danny grinned, then looked serious. "But Miss Emmy says I have to get my blood counts up first. Otherwise, I have to stay in isolation." Emmy joined them, carrying Danny's medication. "And that's why we're going to eat all our lunch today, right, buddy?" She ruffled his hair beneath the beanie, a gesture so maternal it made Alex's chest tighten. Later, as they walked together through the quiet hospital corridor, Emmy shared Danny's full story. He lost his parents in a car accident 2 years ago. Then the diagnosis came shortly after. He's been in and out of foster homes between treatments, but his condition makes long-term placement difficult. Alex stopped walking, memories of his own loss colliding with this new reality. He's fighting all this alone. "Not alone," Emmy corrected softly. "He has all of us." "But," she hesitated, "it's different when you don't have a family to go home to." "The system tries, but these kids need more than just medical care." The wheels in Alex's head started turning. His company's foundation, the children's wing they were building, the resources at his disposal, suddenly it all felt connected to this moment, to this child who dreamed of building robots while fighting for his life. His science fair project, Alex said suddenly. "What if we could get some real engineers to help him? I know people at the robotics division who'd love to mentor a kid like Danny." Emmy's eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "It's just the beginning," Alex replied, ideas flowing faster than he could process them. "These kids, they need more than just a new hospital wing. They need hope, opportunities, a chance to make their dreams real despite everything they're facing." As if on cue, Danny's laugh echoed from his room, where a child life specialist was helping him with homework. The sound wrapped around Alex's heart, squeezing it in a way that was both painful and wonderful. "You're different," Amy observed, touching his arm lightly. "From that man I met on New Year's Eve. There's light in your eyes now." Alex looked at her, at this woman who had somehow helped him find his way back to what mattered most. "These kids," he said softly, "they've taught me more about living in 3 weeks than I learned in 3 years of running a company." Through the window of Danny's room, they could see him sketching something in his notebook, probably another robot design. His red beanie was slightly crooked, his face serious with concentration. In that moment, Alex understood what Claire had always said about family being more than just blood ties. Sometimes it was about the connections that snuck up on you, healing your heart when you least expected it. The science fair display stood proud in the hospital's activity room, complete with flashing lights and a small robotic arm that could pick up and sort blocks by color. Danny beamed as he demonstrated his project, the engineers from Alex's company watching with genuine amazement at the 8-year-old's understanding of basic robotics. But Alex barely heard the presentation. His eyes were fixed on the empty chair where Danny's doctor was supposed to be sitting. Amy's tense shoulders and forced smile told him something was wrong. She'd been avoiding his gaze all morning, unusual for someone who typically met challenges head-on. After the presentations, when the other children had returned to their rooms and the engineers had packed up their equipment, Alex found Amy in the small staff break room. She stood by the window, holding a coffee cup that had long gone cold. "His latest tests came back," she said before Alex could ask, her voice tight with emotion. "The treatment isn't working as well as we hoped. We need to try something more aggressive, but—" She turned to face him, eyes glistening. "The new protocol isn't covered by state insurance." Alex reached for his phone immediately. "I'll take care of it, whatever it costs." "Stop." Amy's voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't about money, Alex. Or rather, it's not just about money. When you've been doing this job as long as I have, you learn that throwing money at problems isn't always the answer." The words stung, hitting too close to home. Wasn't that exactly what he'd been doing since Claire died? Building bigger buildings, making larger donations, as if the size of the check could fill the hole in his heart. "Then what is the answer?" he asked, his voice raw with frustration, "because I can't just stand here and watch him suffer when I have the means to help." Amy set down her coffee cup and faced him fully. "The answer is making sure he has a support system that will last beyond whatever treatment we try. The answer is being there for the hard days, not just the science fair victories. The answer is," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "making sure our hearts are truly ready for what that means." The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Were they ready? Was he ready? In the weeks since New Year's, they'd grown closer, sharing meals in the hospital cafeteria, talking late into the night about their hopes and fears. But they'd carefully avoided putting a name to what was growing between them. "I visit Claire's grave every Sunday," Alex said suddenly. "I tell her about Danny, about you, about everything that's changing. Sometimes I feel guilty for feeling happy again." Amy moved closer, close enough that he could see the tiny flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "My brother loved photography," she shared. "After he died, I couldn't look at a camera for 2 years. Now I take pictures of my patients' milestones, first steps after surgery, last day of chemo, science fair victories. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means building something new from what remains." A knock at the door interrupted them. Danny sat in his wheelchair, clutching his robot prototype. "Miss Amy? Mr. A? Can we show my robot to the kids in the cancer ward?" Little Sophie really wanted to see it, but she couldn't come to the fair. The pure innocence of the request broke through the tension. Alex knelt beside Danny's wheelchair. "Of course we can, buddy, but first I need to ask you something important. How would you feel about trying a new kind of treatment? One that might make you feel worse before you feel better." Danny considered this with the serious expression he wore when working on complex robot designs. "Will it help me get strong enough to build real robots someday?" "That's the hope," Amy answered, joining them. "But it's going to be a tough journey." "Like when the Mars rover got stuck in the sand?" Danny asked, referencing their favorite story. "But it didn't give up, it kept trying new ways to get free." Alex felt tears prick at his eyes. "Exactly like that." "Then I want to try," Danny said firmly. "But will you both be there, even on the bad days?" The question carried more weight than the boy could know. Alex looked at Amy, seeing his own fears and hopes reflected in her eyes. Being there for the bad days meant opening themselves up to the possibility of more loss, more pain. But it also meant choosing love over fear, choosing life over mere existence. "We'll be there," Alex promised, and he saw Amy nod. Every step of the way. As they wheeled Danny down to visit Sophie, Alex felt something shift inside him. The guilt he carried about moving forward, about finding joy again, began to loosen its grip. Claire had always said that love multiplied, it didn't divide. Maybe this was what she meant, that opening your heart again didn't diminish past love, it expanded your capacity for more. The hospital corridor stretched ahead of them, lit by afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Danny chatted excitedly about his robot, Amy laughed at his enthusiasm, and Alex realized that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought in boardrooms or operating theaters, but in the quiet spaces of the heart, where we decide whether to let love in again, despite knowing the risks. The hospital room was too quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Danny lay sleeping, smaller than ever against the white sheets, his red beanie now replaced by a soft blue one that Amy had knitted during the long nights of his new treatment. 2 weeks had passed since they'd started the aggressive protocol, and each day seemed to bring new challenges. Alex sat in the uncomfortable chair beside the bed, his laptop open to endless spreadsheets about the new children's wing construction. But his eyes kept drifting to Danny's pale face, to the dark circles under his eyes, to the way his small chest rose and fell with each breath. The insurance company called again, Amy said softly, entering the room with fresh supplies. They're questioning the treatment authorization, said it's experimental and not proven effective enough to justify the cost. The bitterness in her voice was unusual for someone typically so composed. "I told you, I'll handle it," Alex replied, already reaching for his phone. "One call to my lawyers." "And then what?" Amy interrupted, setting down the supplies harder than necessary. "You'll throw money at this problem like you do with everything else. Create another foundation. Build another wing." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unexpected. Alex stared at her, caught off guard by the outbreak. "I'm trying to help," he said carefully. "Isn't that what you want?" "What I want," Amy said, her voice trembling slightly, "is for you to understand that some things can't be fixed with a checkbook. These kids, Danny, they need more than just financial solutions. They need," she paused, struggling to find the words. "They need what?" Alex stood up, his own frustration rising. "Because from where I'm standing, money is the only thing standing between Danny and the treatment he needs. Money that I have. Money that could save his life. They need someone who understands that healing isn't just about survival." Amy's voice cracked. "It's about feeling secure, feeling loved, having a future to look forward to. You can't just sweep in like some corporate superhero, solve the immediate crisis, and think that's enough." The monitors beeped steadily in the background as they faced each other across Danny's bed. Alex felt a familiar wall going up inside him, the same one he built after Claire died, the one that said it was safer not to get too invested, too involved. "I thought that's what I was doing," he said quietly. "Getting involved. Being here. Isn't that what you wanted?" Amy's eyes softened slightly. "Being here isn't the same as being present, Alex. You sit with him, but your mind is on work. You solve problems, but you keep your heart guarded. It's like you're afraid to fully commit to caring about him. About any of us." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind. Claire in her hospital bed, making him promise to live fully again. Danny's face lighting up when talking about robots. Amy's gentle hands caring for her patients. All the moments he'd kept himself slightly removed from, protected behind his wealth and influence. "You're right," he admitted, the words feeling raw in his throat. "I am afraid. Every time I look at Danny, I see all the dreams Claire and I had about having our own children. Every time I see you with him, I remember what it felt like to watch someone I love suffer and not be able to do anything about it." "So you keep one foot out the door," Amy said softly, "ready to retreat to your corporate world where everything can be controlled with contracts and bank accounts. And you're so focused on protecting everyone else's hearts that you won't admit you're scared too," Alex countered. "Scared of letting someone help, of sharing the burden, of accepting that sometimes money actually can make a difference." A small sound from the bed made them both turn. Danny was watching them with tired eyes. "Are you fighting because of me?" he asked in a small voice that made Alex's heart crack. "No, buddy," Annie moved quickly to his side, adjusting his blanket. "We're just having a grown-up discussion about how to help you get better." "Like when my robot's programming conflicted?" Danny asked, his mind always going back to his beloved machines. Sometimes you have to debug the whole system to find the real problem. Alex and Amy exchanged looks over his head, the simple wisdom of his words settling between them. Maybe they both had some debugging to do. Alex with his tendency to use money as a shield against deeper involvement, Amy with her fierce independence that sometimes prevented her from accepting help. "I just want us all to be a family," Danny murmured as he drifted back to sleep, the words slipping out like a dream. Like in the stories. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and fear. Alex looked at Amy, really looked at her, saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the worry lines around her mouth, the fierce love she had for her patients that matched his own growing feelings for both her and Danny. "I should go," he said finally, gathering his laptop. "I have a board meeting." Amy nodded, her face carefully neutral. "Of course. Back to the real world." As Alex reached the door, he paused. "You know, Claire used to say that the real world isn't in boardrooms or bank accounts. It's in the moments we choose to be fully present for, even when they terrify us." He left before she could respond, the weight of unspoken words and unfaced fears following him down the quiet hospital corridor. Sometimes, he was learning, the biggest breaks weren't in business deals or medical treatments, but in the hearts that had to decide whether the risk of loving again was worth the potential pain of loss. Spring arrived with a gentle warmth that seemed to breathe new life into everything it touched. The hospital garden, visible from Danny's room, had burst into bloom with pink cherry blossoms and yellow daffodils. But the most beautiful sight was Danny himself, sitting up in bed, his color returning, his eyes bright with renewed energy. The experimental treatment had worked. After weeks of uncertainty, sleepless nights, and countless prayers, his body had responded. Alex stood in the doorway, watching as Emmy checked Danny's vital signs, both of them laughing about something. He hadn't been back to the hospital in 2 weeks, not since their argument, but he'd made sure the treatment continued without any insurance hassles. "Mr. A." Danny's face lit up when he spotted him. "Look what I can do." He held up his tablet, showing a simple program he'd written that made little animated robots dance across the screen. "The computer teacher you sent helped me learn coding while I was stuck in bed." Alex stepped into the room, his heart squeezing at the sight of Danny's enthusiasm. "That's amazing, buddy. You'll be building real robots in no time." Amy finished noting Danny's vitals, her movements professional but her eyes avoiding Alex's. "Your blood counts are looking good," she told Danny. "A few more days of observation, and we can talk about discharge planning." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Discharge planning. The future they'd all been hoping for, but hadn't dared to discuss. What would happen to Danny once he was well enough to leave? "I've been thinking about that," Alex said quietly. Annie finally looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd entered the room. "Danny, remember how you said you wanted us to be a family? Like in the stories?" Danny nodded, his hands stilling on the tablet. "But Miss Amy said sometimes real life is more complicated than stories." "She's right," Alex smiled, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Real life is complicated. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it hurts so much we think we'll never be happy again." He glanced at Amy, saw the tears gathering in her eyes. "But sometimes, if we're brave enough to try, real life can be even better than stories." From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a folder. "These are adoption papers," he said softly. "I spent the last 2 weeks talking to lawyers, social workers, and the foster care system. If you want, if both of you want, we could make this official. All of it." Danny's eyes grew wide. "You mean, like a real family?" "The realist," Alex replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But only if that's what you want. And only," he looked at Amy, "if your favorite nurse would consider making it official too. All of it." Amy's hands flew to her mouth, tears now flowing freely. "Alex, you were right," he continued. "About everything. About money not being the answer to everything. About being present. About being brave enough to fully commit." He reached for her hand. These past 2 weeks without you both, it was like living in black and white again. I don't want to do that anymore. I want the full color version of life, even if it's scary, even if it hurts sometimes. Danny looked between them, his face serious. Does this mean you're not fighting anymore? Alex laughed softly. No more fighting, just learning to be better together. But what about your company? Annie asked, her practical nature showing through even in this emotional moment. Your life in the city? I've been thinking about that too, Alex smiled. The new children's wing needs a full-time director. Someone who understands both the business side and the human side. Who better than someone who's learned the hard way that both matter? And my robots. Danny piped up, making them both laugh through their tears. The robotics division is setting up a learning lab in the new wing, Alex assured him. You'll have all the tools you need to keep inventing. Plus, he added with a grin, our new house has a perfect space for a workshop. Our house, Amy whispered. Alex squeezed her hand. I bought Claire's old family home in the suburbs, the one with the big garden she loved so much. It needs some fixing up, but I thought it might be the perfect place for a new family to grow, while still honoring the love that came before. Danny's face suddenly clouded with worry. But what about Miss Amy's other kids here? She can't leave them. I thought about that too, Alex said. Part of the new wing includes an expanded after-school program for long-term patients. We'll need a dedicated nurse to run it. Someone who knows how to knit perfect beanies and tell the best bedtime stories. Amy laughed through her tears. You've really thought of everything, haven't you? I had 2 weeks to think, Alex smiled. And a lifetime of reasons to get it right this time. Spring sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over all three of them. Outside, the cherry blossoms danced in the breeze, their petals creating a gentle pink snow that reminded Alex of that New Year's Eve when everything changed. So, Danny asked, looking between them with hope shining in his eyes, are we really going to be a family? Annie moved to sit on his other side, completing their circle. I think, she said softly, meeting Alex's gaze over Danny's head, we already are. In that moment, as Danny hugged them both and the promise of tomorrow filled the room like the spring sunshine, Alex felt Claire's presence more strongly than ever. Not as a ghost of the past, but as the angel who had helped guide him here to this new chance at love, at family, at living fully again. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest act of love is not holding on to what was lost, but opening your heart to what can be found. And sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that begin where you least expect them, in a small diner on a snowy New Year's Eve, in a hospital room full of dreams, in the moment you finally find the courage to let love heal all the broken places.